You get 15,000, Dad. My son, Darius, sneered at me, utterly convinced he was about to inherit the $30 million his mother had left behind. I just waited in silence. When the attorney turned the page, Darius's face was still pale, but mine was steady. I was standing in front of the mahogany casket when I felt my son's hand shove me aside. It wasn't the gentle nudge you'd expect at a memorial. It was deliberate, calculated, just strong enough to make me stumble in the worn dress shoes I'd had for 20 years. Move aside, Dad. You've played your part. Darius's voice sliced through the murmur of condolences like a rusty razor blade. 67 years of life, 42 years of marriage, and that was how my only child treated me the day I buried Eliza. Right there, in front of business executives in designer suits, neighbors pretending not to notice, and distant relatives who came more for the catered buffet than the memories. I didn't cry. Instead, I looked at the casket. Eliza had that serene expression she never seemed to possess in life, and I wondered if she knew. If from wherever she was, she could see the monster we had raised together. Or, rather, the monster she had created while I held together a home I was never given credit for. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, was leaning against the back wall of the funeral home, wearing a black silk dress with a neckline that was disrespectful for a memorial service. Her acrylic nails were the color of dried blood. She smiled when our eyes met. It wasn't a smile of comfort. It was a smirk of victory. And in that exact moment, I understood. They had already divided everything. The inheritance, the properties, the cars, the bank accounts, everything. As if I were nothing but an administrative obstacle to be bypassed. The room smelled of white calla lilies and hypocrisy. Eliza hated those giant flowers, but Darius had insisted on ordering them because they projected an image of success. I counted 140 arrangements as people filed past with their empty condolences. Your wife was an exemplary woman, Tom. Truly exemplary. That word haunted me my whole life. Exemplary. In the kitchen. Exemplary in raising our son. Exemplary in staying quiet when Eliza came home at 3 a.m, smelling of expensive wine and cologne. But at that funeral, with my son shoving me aside and my daughter-in-law smiling, exemplary became synonymous with invisible. The service was quick. Eliza wasn't religious, so the minister was brief, professional, efficient, like someone checking off another task for the day. Darius gave the eulogy. He spoke of a visionary mother, a brilliant entrepreneur, a woman who built an empire from nothing. He never mentioned my name once, not when listing the important people in her life, not when thanking those who supported her. 42 years erased in 12 minutes of a rehearsed speech. When they lowered the casket, Darius threw the first rose, Tiffany the second. They waited for me to approach, not to console me, but to make sure I didn't cause a scene. I walked slowly, feeling the weight of every gaze piercing my back. I threw a daisy. Eliza hated roses. At the cemetery exit, as people dispersed toward their imported cars, Darius caught up to me. He was accompanied by the family attorney, Randall Lewis, a gray-haired man with thin glasses who always greeted me with a nod that seemed genuine. Dad, the reading of the will is tomorrow at 10. Don't be late. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. I spent that night alone in the house I had shared with Eliza since Darius was 3. A house too big for one person, filled with rooms that collected memories like dust. I sat on the living room sofa, the one in deep emerald velvet that I'd bought at an antique store in 1995, and let the silence swallow me whole. Was it worth it to be exemplary? If you want to know how a lifetime of sacrifice can be erased in seconds, subscribe because this story is just beginning. And what comes next will draw cries of outrage from your throat. Attorney Lewis's office was on the 12th floor of a mirrored building in the Aon Center, downtown Chicago. One of those places that reflect the sky and make you feel small just by looking at it. I arrived 15 minutes early, as I had done my whole life. Punctuality was one of the few things my father taught me before he passed away. A man who respects himself doesn't keep anyone waiting. The receptionist, a young woman with hair too straight to be natural, offered me coffee. I accepted, but the cup trembled so much in my hand that I had to put it down on the saucer. It wasn't fear, it was contained rage, the kind that ferments in your chest and rises in your throat like bile. Darius arrived 20 minutes late. He strode into the office like someone invading conquered territory, his broad shoulders taking up more space than necessary. Tiffany trailed behind him, balancing on gold stilettos that clicked against the marble floor. She wore sunglasses indoors, in the climate-controlled space, as if she were still mourning or trying to hide the eyes of someone calculating every move. "Morning, Dad." Darius's voice was mechanical, perfunctory, the kind you use with a bank teller. I didn't respond. I just watched him drop into the leather armchair next to me, stretching his legs in a way that invaded my space. Tiffany sat on the other side, crossed her legs, and started scrolling through her phone. The screen's glow illuminated her face at angles that made her look even more calculating. Attorney Lewis came in last, carrying a worn brown folder. He greeted me with a respectful nod. Then he looked at Darius with an expression I couldn't decipher at the time. Today, looking back, I know exactly what it was. Pity mixed with contempt. "All right, let's begin." Lewis adjusted his glasses and opened the folder with slow, almost ceremonial movements. The last will and testament of Eliza Elizabeth Patterson, recorded before a notary on March the 15th of this year, 3 months before her passing. 3 months. Eliza knew she was dying. The pancreatic cancer had hit fast, but not without warning. And in those last 3 months, she had made decisions. Attorney Lewis cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Eliza Elizabeth Patterson, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare my last wishes." Darius was drumming his fingers on the table, an irritating, anxious rhythm, like someone waiting for a prize to be announced. Tiffany lowered her phone and leaned forward, finally paying attention. "To my beloved husband, Thomas Peterson, I leave the sum of $15,000, deposited in a checking account, as well as the residential property located at 2500 South Shore Drive, Hyde Park." The world stopped. $15,000. Darius's laughter exploded like a gunshot in that room of glass walls, a loud, mocking guffaw that made the receptionist outside lift her head. He slammed his hand on the table so hard that the attorney's pen rolled onto the floor. 15,000? 15,000. Darius turned to me, his eyes gleaming with that mix of victory and cruelty only an ungrateful son can possess. "Dad, that won't even cover Tiffany's manicure appointments. What in God's name did you do to Mom to make her leave you this pittance?" Tiffany let out a sharp giggle, covering her mouth with her red-nailed hand and whispering something to Darius. He laughed again. Attorney Lewis remained impassive, the paper still in his hand, as if waiting for the circus to end. I felt every syllable of that laugh penetrate my skin like shards of glass. $15,000, 42 years of marriage, of washing clothes, of preparing dinners for investors who barely acknowledged me, of holding Eliza's hand during nights when she woke up sweating over the debts that almost led us to bankruptcy twice. All of it was worth $15,000. The house. At least she had left the house. And as for the rest of the estate, Darius didn't even wait for Attorney Lewis to finish. He snatched the paper from the lawyer's hands with a jerk. "Let me see this, counselor. Please." The attorney tried to retrieve the document, but my son was already reading aloud, the emotion dripping from every syllable. "To my son, Darius Patterson, I leave the entirety of my business interests, stock holdings, commercial properties, financial investments, and vehicles, with an estimated total net worth of $30 million. $30 million. Tiffany jumped up and hugged Darius, screaming as if she had won the lottery. He lifted her off the floor, spinning her around in the middle of that mahogany and glass office. I remained seated, my hands crossed over the faux leather briefcase I had carried for 8 years, watching my son celebrate as if I weren't there, as if I had never existed. "You know what this means, my love?" Tiffany ran her hands over Darius's face, that high-pitched voice she used when she wanted something. "We can buy that South Beach condo and change the car. I've always wanted a convertible Mercedes. You'll have it." Darius kissed her neck right there, in front of the lawyer, and in front of me. "Anything you want, princess. Everything." Lewis slowly, meticulously, put the papers away. He closed the folder, adjusted his glasses, and finally looked up at me. There was something in that look, a silent message I couldn't understand. "Mr. Peterson will need to sign some documents to formalize the transfer of the house into his name. Shall we schedule that for next week?" Before I could answer, Darius interrupted. "Actually, counselor, about that house." He sat down again, now with the posture of a businessman, someone accustomed to making decisions. "What's that property worth on the current market?" My stomach dropped. "It's a residence in a highly sought-after area, 5,400 square feet of land. I would say around $3.5 million. Attorney Lewis replied in a neutral voice. $3.5 million. Darius stroked his chin thoughtfully. Then he looked at me like someone evaluating an old object, deciding whether to keep or throw away. "Dad, don't you think that's too big of a house for you? All alone at your age? What if something happens to you? Who's going to help you?" The concern in his voice was so false, it was offensive. "Darius is right, Dad." Tiffany approached. She touched my shoulder with those acrylic nails. I wanted to rip them off one by one. "We could find you a smaller apartment, more practical. Or maybe one of those senior communities. Some of them are really nice, you know? With nurses, activities, an assisted living facility." She was suggesting an assisted living facility. I looked into my son's face. I searched for some trace of the boy I had rocked when he had colic. The one I taught to walk, to read, to tie his shoes. The boy who cried in my arms when the other kids at school excluded him. I searched for a spark of humanity. I found nothing, only the distorted reflection of a man who had learned from his mother that love is measured in dollars, and that I, in his eyes, was worth no more than 15,000. "I'll think about it." My voice came out firm, surprising even myself. I got up from the armchair, grabbed my briefcase, and headed for the door. Attorney Lewis accompanied me into the hallway. Before I entered the elevator, he leaned in and whispered, "Mr. Peterson, don't sign anything without talking to me first. Nothing." "Do you understand?" I understand. But I still didn't know why. I would only find out when it was too late for Darius to turn back. The days following the reading of the will were like living inside an emotional deep freeze. Darius didn't call me again. Tiffany stopped pretending to be kind. It was as if I had officially become an item, checked off their list of priorities. But the house was still mine, for now. I knew they would return. People like Darius and Tiffany always come back when they want something. The following Thursday, exactly at 11 in the morning, the doorbell rang, with the insistent urgency of someone who wouldn't accept being ignored. I opened the door and found myself face to face with both of them. Darius wore a charcoal gray suit I'd never seen before, surely bought with the newly inherited money. Tiffany wore a beige linen suit and carried an executive portfolio, as if she were there for business. She was. "Hi, Dad. We need to talk." Darius walked in without waiting for an invitation, his Italian leather shoes marking the oak floor I had waxed the day before. Tiffany followed, her French perfume nauseatingly filling the air. I closed the door slowly, mentally counting to 10, a technique I had learned from decades of swallowing insults. "Sit here, Dad. This is important." Darius pointed to the sofa, my sofa. As if he owned the house, I sat on the edge, spine straight, hands in my lap. A posture my grandmother said belonged to a man who doesn't bend easily. Tiffany opened the portfolio and spread papers across the coffee table. Architectural plans, property appraisals, brochures for compact apartments in neighborhoods I'd never heard of. "Look what we brought you." Her voice was too sweet, the kind of sweetness that precedes poison. "Lovely apartments, furnished, in complexes with 24-hour security. This one even has a recreation room for seniors." She pushed a colorful brochure toward me. A boxy, personality-less building with tiny balconies and a pool the size of a bathtub. The kind of place where people go to quietly disappear. "We're thinking about your well-being, Dad." Darius leaned forward, elbow on his knee. That posture of someone about to make a generous offer. "You'd be much more comfortable in a smaller place, no stairs, no garden to care for, no maintenance worries." "And this house?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well," Darius exchanged a quick glance with Tiffany. "We were thinking of selling. The market is hot. It's the perfect time. With $3.5 million in the pocket, of course." "And if I don't want to sell?" My voice came out calm, almost curious. Darius's smile wavered for a fraction of a second. Tiffany stopped leafing through papers and looked at me with those calculating eyes. "Dad, be reasonable." Her tone changed. It became harder. "You're 67. You're alone. This house is huge, expensive to maintain. What if you fall? What if you get sick? Who's going to help you?" Every word was a polite slap. Darius sighed, ran a hand through his gelled hair, and changed strategy. He stood up and began to walk around the living room, touching objects as if taking the inventory. He stopped in front of the rosewood hutch that had belonged to my grandmother. "These old things here?" He knocked his knuckles against the dark wood, the sound echoing hollowly. "They're worth a fortune, you know? Authentic rosewood, probably from the 40s. $8,000, maybe $10,000 easy." My heart tightened. That hutch had been Grandma Edith's. It passed to my mother, then to me. I used to polish that wood every Sunday, conversing with the memories it held. "Technically, Dad," Darius turned back to me, hands in his pockets. "Everything inside this house belonged to Mom, and now it belongs to me. The house is yours, but the contents, well, that's part of the estate." I felt the ground collapse beneath my feet. "You can't be serious." "I'm being practical." He shrugged, as if explaining basic math to a slow child. "You don't need all this stuff, and I need to liquidate assets to invest in the business. Mom left the company, but the working capital is tight." Tiffany got up, ran her hand over the Austrian crystal chandelier in the dining room. "This one right here, for example, authentic 120-year-old crystal. Should be worth around $4,500. We can sell it and buy you a modern lamp, much more practical."
They were serious. They were going to empty my house, rip out every memory, every piece of history I had built. A team of appraisers is coming tomorrow. Darius was already heading toward the door as if the matter were settled. They'll catalog everything of value. Don't worry, Dad. We won't take your personal things, clothes, photos, that kind of stuff. You can keep those. How generous. Tiffany gave me a kiss in the air, that empty gesture people make when they want to seem affectionate without actually touching the other person. Think about the apartments. Yeah, Dad. We just want what's best for you. And they left like that, leaving papers scattered on my table, the scent of expensive perfume in the air, and a black hole where a father's heart should have been. I sat there, in the heavy silence that settles after a storm. I looked at Grandma Edith's hutch, the chandelier my mother had bought when she married, the linen curtains I had hand-sewn 30 years ago. 42 years in that house. Every corner had a history. Every object was an anchor of memory, and my son wanted to liquidate everything like clearance merchandise. Just then, the doorbell rang again. I got up slowly, legs trembling, expecting them to have returned to rip out another piece of my dignity. But when I opened the door, I found Ms. Carol Johnson, my neighbor, with a pan of warm apple pie in her hands. I saw those two leaving here looking like conniving vultures. She walked in without ceremony, placed the pie on the kitchen table, and looked at me with those perceptive eyes of someone who had lived a lot and learned to read people. Tell me everything, Tom, and don't skip the details. And I told her. For the first time since Eliza died, I opened my mouth and let everything out. The humiliations, the $15,000, the plan to put me in a tiny apartment while they sold my life wholesale. Carol listened in silence, cutting generous slices of pie that we both ate. When I finished, she took off her glasses, wiped the lenses with the hem of her blouse, and said the phrase that would change everything. Tom, I was a lawyer for 40 years before retiring, and what your son is doing smells like coercion. Did you sign any power of attorney? Any papers they gave you? No, not yet. Good. Don't sign anything, and give me that attorney Lewis's number right now. Carol took my phone and dialed. She spoke to the secretary. She identified herself as Attorney Carol Johnson, legal advisor to Mr. Thomas Peterson, a half-truth she transformed into an established fact, and demanded an urgent appointment. 20 minutes later, we were in her car, an impeccably maintained 2010 Ford Taurus, heading downtown. There's something very strange about this whole story, Tom. She drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, thinking, a woman like your Eliza doesn't leave her husband of 42 years destitute like that. Not after 42 years. Something wasn't said at that reading. And that was when the first spark of hope ignited in the darkness. Maybe I wasn't as alone as Darius imagined. Maybe there was still an ace up my sleeve that no one had played. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the double bed that seemed too big without Eliza beside me, staring at the ceiling where a water stain formed the silhouette of a bird with outstretched wings. Eliza always said she would get it fixed. She never did. Memories came in waves, the kind you can't control. 42 years pouring over me like cold rain at dawn. I met Eliza in 1983 at a college graduation party.
I was 25 and in my third year of accounting, the first in my family to attend higher education. My mother took tailoring jobs to pay my tuition. My father had died when I was 12, leaving nothing but debts and a gold watch my mother never took off. Eliza was just starting in real estate. She had a rusty blue Datsun B210, 3 mended dresses, and an ambition that couldn't be contained. She looked at me from across the crowded dance floor and said the most audacious thing I'd ever heard. "You're going to marry me. You don't know it yet, but you will. And I did, 6 months later. A simple ceremony at the First AME church with a single tier cake and a borrowed dress from her cousin. My mother cried with joy. You did it, son. You caught a hard-working woman. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I left school 2 weeks before the wedding. Eliza had acquired a plot of land in partnership with another investor. She was going to build her first building. She needed help with the paperwork, the calculations, the basic architectural plans. Just until the development gets underway, Tom. Then you can go back to school. I never went back. 3 months after the wedding, I discovered Eliza was pregnant with Darius. She opened a bottle of cheap wine and toasted to the man of the house. It never crossed her mind it might be a girl. It wasn't. Darius arrived at 8.4 pounds, red and screaming, crying every night, as if he were angry to have been born. Eliza's first development was a failure. Her partner disappeared with the money, leaving only debts and a labor lawsuit. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with 3-month-old Darius in my arms, giving him a bottle while watching my wife cry, sitting on the empty living room floor. We had sold the furniture to pay the lawyers. I failed, Tom. I'm a failure. I could have agreed. I could have gone back to my mother's house, asked for help, returned to school. But I looked at that broken woman on the floor and made the decision that would define the next 40 years of my life. Get up. You didn't fail. You stumbled. Now get up and try again. And she got up. With my support, with the money I had secretly saved, with my grandmother's jewelry that I sold without telling anyone, we managed to pay the most urgent debts. Eliza started over, this time alone. Small plots of land, affordable houses, tight profits. I took care of Darius, the house, the bills, the tax. I did the spreadsheets by hand, checked every invoice, negotiated payment terms with suppliers, using that gentle voice that disarms men accustomed to shouting. When Darius started school, I started working for real. I got up at 5 in the morning to prepare meals. I dropped the boy off at school at 7. I spent the day in the makeshift office we had set up in the guest room. I picked up Darius at 5 in the afternoon, made dinner, helped with homework, put him to bed, and when I finally lay down, Eliza would come home smelling of liquor and exhaustion, wanting to talk about projects. I slept well, maybe 10 times in those first 10 years. The first major turning point came in 1995. Eliza secured financing to build an 8-story building. It would be the biggest development yet. But halfway through construction, the contractor declared bankruptcy. Half the building was finished. Half the buyers wanted to back out, and the bank was threatening to execute the mortgage. I remember sitting at that same kitchen table, 12-year-old Darius playing video games in his room, when Eliza said, "It's over, Tom. I'm going to have to file for bankruptcy." I was 37. My hair was starting to gray, my hands dry from washing dishes and doing laundry. No degree, no career, no money of my own. Just a ring on my finger. And a son who was already starting to look at me with the same disdain he saw in his mother's eyes. But I didn't let Eliza give up. I called every single buyer. 32 calls. I explained the situation. I promised we would finish. I asked for just 6 more months. 28 agreed. 4 backed out. But we found new buyers. I went to the bank alone. I used the house as collateral without telling Eliza. I secured an extension and an additional loan.
That building was delivered late, strained by sleepless nights. But it was delivered. And the profit, $300,000 at the time, a fortune that finally allowed Eliza to take off. She thanked me that night. She took me to a fancy restaurant, held my hand across the table, and said, "You are the foundation of everything, Tom. Without you, I'm nothing." I believed her, like a foolish man in love. I believed her. But Darius was listening. He was 12, and he heard his mother say that. And you know what he said on the way home? "Mom was exaggerating, right, Dad? You just stay home. She's the one who really works." Eliza laughed, ruffled the boy's hair, and said, "Smart boy." She didn't defend me. She didn't correct him. She just laughed. And it was there, in that car, driving home from the restaurant, that I understood. No matter how much I did, no matter how much I gave, I would always be invisible. The man in the background, the one who holds things up but doesn't shine. The following years were an escalation. Eliza built more buildings, bought more land, opened a real estate development company. Money started flowing. And the more that came in, the less she was home. Meetings, business dinners, conference trips. I stayed home, taking care of Darius, who grew more arrogant by the day, taking care of a house that grew bigger and emptier, taking care of a loneliness that no expensive furniture could fill. When Darius turned 18, he announced he would study business administration. Eliza celebrated, already planning for her son to take over the company reins. When I suggested he try architecture, my unfulfilled dream, Darius looked at me with pity. "Architecture is for artistic types, Dad. Real men run businesses." And Eliza agreed with a nod. My son graduated, joined his mother's company. I met Tiffany at a graduation party. She studied public relations, all put together, all calculated. They married quickly. Eliza paid for the wedding, 300 guests, a seafood buffet, a honeymoon in Paris. I wasn't consulted about anything. I just paid the bills, organized the vendors, and chose the flowers. At the reception, during his speech, Darius thanked his mother for everything she was. He didn't mention my name. It was that night I understood I had raised a monster. Or rather, I had let Eliza raise a monster, while I fed the beast with my silence. And now, 42 years later, lying in that empty bed, staring at the bird-shaped water stain on the ceiling, I wondered, what is a dedicated life worth? $15,000, according to the will. But something told me Eliza had finally seen the error. 3 months before she died, she had seen who her son really was, and had done something about it. I just needed to find out. The appraisal team arrived Tuesday morning at exactly 9. 3 men in white coats with clipboards, accompanied by Darius and Tiffany, who walked into my house like courteous invaders. I was drinking coffee in the kitchen when I heard a key turning in the lock. My key. The one I had given Darius years ago for emergencies. He had never used it until now, and now he used it without even ringing the bell. "Morning, Dad." His voice resonated down the hallway with that fake door-to-door salesman cheerfulness. "I brought the appraisers I told you about." It wasn't a visit, it was a territorial invasion. I slowly got up from the table, smoothing the faded blue checkered apron I'd worn since the 90s with a patch on the pocket that I had sewn myself. I walked to the living room and found the 3 men already measuring walls, photographing furniture, jotting down numbers I couldn't understand. Solid mahogany, original hardware, Louis X style. One of them, the older one with a gray mustache, spoke as he ran his hand over the display cabinet that had belonged to my great-grandmother, Clara. "Excellent condition. The antique market is paying well for pieces like this. Tiffany was sitting on my sofa, scrolling through her phone, legs crossed as if she owned the place. She wore a velvet tracksuit that cost more than my entire pension from when I helped Eliza. Dad, you don't mind if I grab a juice from the fridge, right? She didn't wait for an answer. She went straight to the kitchen, opening cabinets, rummaging, as if looking for something more than juice. Darius pulled me to the corner of the living room, away from the appraisers. Dad, stay calm. They're just cataloging. We're not taking anything today. The tone was condescending, the kind you use with a stubborn child. But you need to understand. Mom left me the estate. These furnishings, these old things, are part of the estate. These furnishings belong to my family. My voice came out firmer than I expected. The hutch was Grandma Edith's. The display cabinet was Great-Grandma Clara's. The chandelier. And Mom paid for the remodel of this house when we got married, Darius interrupted. Technically, everything here was acquired during the marriage, which means community property. And since she was the provider, he left the phrase hanging, as if the rest were too obvious to explain. Provider. That word again, as if 42 years of holding things together didn't count as providing. The appraiser with the mustache approached, holding the rosewood hutch with an almost religious reverence. Sir, this piece here is rare. American rosewood, probably from the 40s. Original hardware. Brass poles. It's appraised at least $8,000 at specialized auctions. $8,000. Grandma Edith had received that hutch as a wedding gift. My mother kept hand-embroidered linen napkins inside. I kept family photographs in a secret drawer, only I knew about. Excellent. Darius clapped, rubbing his hands together like someone closing a good deal. Note it down. That goes straight to Sotheby's. Sotheby's. My grandfather, who was a carpenter and died without knowing how to read, would have the furniture he built with his own hands sold at an international auction house. And this chandelier, another appraiser pointed to the Austrian crystal chandelier in the dining room. Authentic 120-year-old Swarovski crystal. 15 original pendants. Estimated value between $6,000 and $10,000, depending on the buyer. My mother had saved for 3 years to buy that chandelier. It was her dream to have something fine in the house. She died without ever dining beneath it, passing away 2 months before its installation. I lit that chandelier every Sunday and pretended she was there, sitting at the head of the table, smiling proudly. That one's going too. Tiffany appeared with a glass of orange juice, offering her opinion as if she were entitled. We'll buy you a modern lamp, Dad. LED. Energy saving. Much more practical. Practical, efficient, modern. Words that erase history. The appraisers continued through the house, like ants cataloging a colony. They photographed the dressing table in the bedroom, which came from Sweden, and my father had given as a wedding gift to my mother. They measured the Venetian mirror in the hallway, an inheritance from an aunt I never knew, but whose story my mother told every time we passed it. They even appraised the pendulum wall clock in the kitchen that chimed the hours with a metallic sound that calmed me during sleepless nights. In total, this should easily bring in $50,000 to $60,000, the lead appraiser announced after 2 hours of inventory. Guaranteed market. People pay good money for other people's sentimental memories. Other people's sentimental memories. As if mine were worth nothing. Darius signed the appraisal papers with a Mont Blanc pen. Another new purchase with his dead mother's money. He put the copies in his executive portfolio and turned to me with a smile that was supposed to look reassuring, but only seemed predatory. Dad, next week I'm sending a truck to pick up the pieces.
I'll leave you the basic furniture: bed, sofa, table, the essentials. He touched my shoulder, and it took all my self-control not to pull away. And with the money from the sale, I'm going to deposit $1,000 a month into your account, in addition to the $15,000 Mom left. See? You'll have plenty of cash. $1,000 a month. He was going to sell $60,000 in memories and give me $1,000 monthly as charity. And there's one more thing. Tiffany approached, holding a silver picture frame from the bookshelf. It was our wedding photo, Eliza and me, young and smiling, full of future ahead. This is sterling silver, P925, right, Dad? Must be worth about $1,500. She started to pull the photo out of the frame. Something inside me snapped. No. My voice came out low, but firm, like reinforced concrete. Tiffany stopped, the photo still in her hand, looking at me with surprise, as if she didn't expect furniture to talk. What do you mean, no, Dad? Darius frowned. You're not taking this? I snatched the picture frame from Tiffany's hands with a quick movement that surprised even me. Not Grandma Edith's hutch, not my mother's chandelier, nothing that carries my family's history. Dad, you're being irrational. Irrational! My voice rose for the first time in 42 years of marriage and 20 years of anticipated widowhood. Irrational is the two of you walking into my house without permission. Irrational is claiming rights over things that are mine by blood inheritance. No, by notarized paper. The silence that fell was heavy as molten lead. The appraisers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them started putting away his clipboard, signaling he wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. Darius took a step forward, jaw clenched, eyes narrowed. I recognized that expression. It was the same one Eliza wore when she was contradicted, the same one that preceded yelling, fists on the table, and slammed doors. You are going to obey me. He spoke slowly, each word weighing a ton. Because I own this inheritance. And if you don't cooperate, I have very good lawyers who will prove in court that this furniture is part of Mom's estate. Then prove it. I heard my own voice, but it seemed to come from another person, a person tired of being trampled. Go to court, bring your lawyers. But until then, nothing leaves this house without my authorization. And I don't authorize it. Tiffany snorted, rolling her eyes. Darius, let's go. Let your dad have his sick attachment to his old things. We'll deal with Attorney Lewis. They left, slamming the door. The appraisers quickly followed, relieved to escape the battlefield. I was left alone in the living room, still holding the silver picture frame, trembling from head to toe. Not from fear, but from rage. 42 years of swallowing insults, accepting crumbs, being the exemplary man who never complained. But there was a limit, and they had just crossed it. That very afternoon, Ms. Carroll showed up at my door with a thermos of coffee and the determination of someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. She was 70, short white hair, red-rimmed glasses, and an upright posture that defied gravity and time. I saw the circus they staged here this morning. 3 men in lab coats. Your son leaving looking like he bit a lemon. Tell me. She walked in without ceremony, went straight to the kitchen, and poured 2 cups of coffee. And I told her everything. The appraisers, the furniture, the humiliation of seeing my own history quoted as flea market merchandise. Carol listened in absolute silence, nodding at the right moments, her eyes alert behind the thick lenses. When I finished, she took off her glasses, wiped the lenses with the hem of her blouse, a habit I knew meant she was processing important information. And she looked at me seriously. Tom, there's something very strange about this whole story. Very strange. She drummed her fingers on the table, thinking. I was a lawyer specializing in family law for 40 years. I've seen everything. Spouses hiding assets, children forging wills, partners being manipulated. But this, she pointed to me, this smells of coercion and financial abuse. But the will was read by Attorney Lewis. It's legitimate. It was read. Carol stood up, beginning to pace the kitchen, as she used to do in courtrooms when building a line of reasoning. I didn't say it was read completely. What do you mean? Tell me something. Was your wife the type of woman who would leave her husband of 42 years destitute like that? I thought about Eliza. She was many things. Absent, a workaholic, sometimes insensitive, but utterly unjust? No, she knew how much I had sacrificed. She had said it that night after I saved the development. You are the foundation of everything. No, I replied, my voice coming out firmer. She wasn't. Then why would she leave you only $15,000? Carol slammed her hand on the little table, making the cups clink. It makes no sense. Unless what? Unless there's something else in that will. A conditional clause, a second page, an addendum that Attorney Lewis didn't read in front of your son. My heart rate accelerated. The phrase the lawyer had said in the hallway flashed back like lightning. Don't sign anything without talking to me first. Nothing. He told me not to sign anything, I mumbled, more to myself than to Carol. Who said that, Attorney Lewis? After the will reading, he pulled me aside in the hallway and told me not to sign anything without talking to him first. Carol clapped once, hard, like someone who had just solved a puzzle. There it is. I knew it. That man knows something you don't, and neither does your son. That's why. The insistence on making you sign papers, sell the house, put you in an apartment. They want to neutralize you before you find out. Find out what? We'll find out by talking to Attorney Lewis. Now. Carol was already picking up the phone. I tried to protest, to say it was late, that we could wait until tomorrow. But Carol wasn't a woman who waited when she smelled injustice. She called the office. She identified herself as Attorney Carol Johnson, legal advisor to Mr. Thomas Peterson, a half-truth she transformed into an established fact, and demanded an urgent meeting. 20 minutes later, we were in her car, heading downtown. Lewis's office was empty at that hour, almost 6 in the evening. The receptionist had already left, but he was waiting for us personally at the door. Jacket slung over his shoulder, tie loosened, the face of someone who had spent all day in exhausting hearings. Mr. Peterson. He shook my hand with both of his, a gesture that conveyed urgency and concern. I was hoping you'd come. Please, come in. He greeted Carol with the respect of someone recognizing a colleague. He led us to the conference room, closed the door carefully, and before sitting down, checked that the blinds were tightly closed, as if about to reveal a state secret. Mr. Peterson, I'm going to be direct because we don't have time to waste. Lewis opened a locked drawer from which he took out a sealed folder with a notary stamp. Your wife came to see me 3 months before she passed. She discovered something about your son, something serious. The air left my lungs. What did she discover? Lewis opened the folder with precise movements. Inside were documents, bank statements, copies of contracts, and, my God, photographs. Darius has been embezzling money from the company for at least 5 years. He spread the documents on the table like a detective presenting evidence of a crime. Fake contracts with phantom suppliers, altered invoices, transfers to shell accounts. He siphoned off approximately $15 million. $15 million. Carol picked up one of the bank statements, ran her finger down the line of numbers, and whistled softly. This is criminal speculation, document forgery, money laundering. Exactly.
Louis took off his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. Eliza was devastated when she found out. She hired an independent auditor, and it confirmed everything. She thought about reporting him to the police, but she couldn't. He was her son, her only son. So what did she do? She changed the will. My voice came out trembling. Louis took a sealed envelope from the folder. My name was written on the front, in Eliza's shaky handwriting. The script that had worsened in her final months. Not a simple will. She created a clever conditional clause. Very clever. Now Carol leaned forward, smelling the legal strategy. What kind of clause? A behavior clause. Attorney Louis opened the envelope, revealing 2 typewritten pages. In the first reading, I only read the first page, the one that left $15,000 to Mr. Peterson and the rest to Darius. But there is a second page, a page that can only be read if certain conditions are met. What conditions? I asked, barely able to breathe. The clause reads as follows. If my son, Darius Patterson, demonstrates, within 30 days following my death, unworthy, disrespectful, or abusive behavior toward his father, Thomas Peterson, as documented by the testimony of the will's executor, the entirety of the inheritance left to him shall be completely reverted to his father, with only the symbolic sum of $15,000 being allocated to my son, in this case, the same amount initially assigned to his father. The silence that fell over that room was so heavy, I could hear my own heart beating out of rhythm. Eliza did this? I could barely form the words. She did, and she named me the executor of the will, with powers to document Darius's behavior during this 30-day period. Cameras, recordings, witnesses, everything is valid. Louis slid a small device onto the table, a digital recorder. Your mother asked me to install security cameras in the house months ago connected to my server. The reading of the will, where he mocked you. Today's meeting with the appraisers who invaded your house. Carol picked up the recorder, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a lawyer who had just found definitive evidence. How many days have passed? 23. Louis looked at me intently. 7 days remaining, Mr. Peterson. 7 days to document your son's character. He gathered the documents. And from what I've seen so far, he closed the folder with a decisive gesture. I believe we already have more than enough material. I looked at that folder. Inside was redemption, proof that I wasn't invisible, that my sacrifice hadn't been in vain, that Eliza had finally seen the truth. But inside was also my son's sentence, and as much as he deserved it, as much as he had humiliated and disrespected me, he was still my son. And that hurt more than any inheritance could heal. Carol brewed chamomile tea when we returned home. She said it was to calm my nerves, but I think it was more to have something concrete to do while I processed the bomb that had just exploded in my life. I sat in the same kitchen chair where I had had coffee 1,000 mornings in a row, where I had helped Darius with his homework, where I had cried in secret when Eliza forgot my birthday. And now I discovered that in the end, she had tried to fix everything or destroy everything, depending on the angle. You need to understand something, Tom. Carol placed the warm mug between my hands. Eliza didn't do this out of cruelty. She did it for justice. And more importantly, she gave you the power of choice. What choice? To leave my son in poverty? $15,000 isn't poverty. It's a lesson. She pulled her chair closer to mine. She held my face in both hands, forcing me to look at her. Listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you, because it's important. You're not destroying your son. He destroyed himself when he chose to steal them from his mother, humiliate his father, and think he would get away with it. But he's my son. And you are his father, not his doormat. Being a father is not accepting abuse. Being a father is not letting your child become a monster without consequences. Sometimes the greatest proof of love is letting someone fall so they can learn to stand up on their own. I drank the tea in silence, feeling the warm liquid descend and heat the frozen void that had settled in my chest. So Carol was right. I knew it. But knowing didn't make the decision less painful. Attorney Lewis said there are 7 days left. I spoke more to myself. 7 days until the clause is activated. What if they find out? They won't find out. Carol crossed her arms. Strategist mode activated. You're going to act normal. If Darius calls, answer. If he shows up here, receive him. Let him continue to hang himself with his own rope. I don't know if I can pretend. You don't need to pretend. Just be yourself. The man who survived 42 years of invisibility without losing his dignity. Carol squeezed my hand. If you falter at any point, call me, no matter what time. She slept in the guest room that night. She said it was too late to drive, but I knew it was to keep me company, to make sure I didn't fall apart alone under the weight of that truth. The following days were the strangest of my life. Darius called twice, once to say he had resolved the furniture issue with the lawyer, and I didn't need to worry. Another time to let me know he had found a perfect apartment for me in a senior community. It has a recreation room, Dad, and craft classes. You're going to love it. Crafts, as if I were a senile old man whose only purpose was to pass the time with his hands. I swallowed my rage, thanked him politely, and hung up. Carol, who was next to me, took notes in a little notebook. Day 25. Son attempts to coerce father into accepting unwanted apartment. On Thursday, Tiffany showed up unannounced. She brought brochures for retirement homes, luxury residences for seniors, and a smile as fake as her gel nails. Dad, look how nice. Heated pool, 24-hour nurses, cable TV room. She spread the brochures on the table like someone presenting resort options. And best of all, Darius already paid the first month. You can move next week. I'm not going anywhere, Tiffany. I kept my voice calm but firm. She blinked, confused, as if she couldn't process the possibility of being told no. But Dad, we already closed the deal. They'll lose the deposit if you don't go. Then let them lose it. I went back to washing the dishes, deliberately turning my back on her. I didn't ask. I didn't authorize. And I'm not going. I felt her rage radiating against my back. She stood there for a few seconds, breathing heavily, before gathering the brochures with jerky movements. You are ungrateful. Darius only wants what's best for you, and you are being ridiculous with this stubbornness. Her voice rose an octave. But fine. When you fall alone in this old house and are left lying on the floor for days without anyone helping you, don't come crying. She slammed the door so hard that the wall clock stopped for a few seconds before starting to work again. Carol, who had heard everything from the bedroom, appeared with her phone in her hand. Veiled threat, psychological coercion, attempted abandonment of an elderly person. She smiled with grim satisfaction. Attorney Lewis is going to love this. On Saturday, with 3 days remaining for the deadline, Darius showed up with papers, lots of papers. They were powers of attorney, authorizations, property transfers, all disguised in complicated legal language that a common person wouldn't understand. Dad, I need you to sign these, just inventory paperwork. He put the documents in front of me, offering an expensive pen. Attorney Lewis sent them, Civil registry stuff. You know how it is. I took the papers, slowly reading every line, every paragraph. And there, hidden on page 3 under the innocent title, Cession of Testamentary Rights, was the trap. I would be waiving any future claim to Eliza's estate. Attorney Lewis sent this? I looked him in the eyes. Yes, I talked to him yesterday. A lie. Lewis had called me last night to say Darius had tried to schedule an appointment, but he had invented an excuse about being out of town. I'll read it carefully, and then I'll sign. I put the papers away. Dad, it's urgent. It needs to be today to submit it on Monday. Then it will have to wait until Monday. I closed the folder, crossing my arms. I don't sign anything without reading it thoroughly. I saw his jaw clench, his nostrils flare, his eyes darken in the way Eliza used to when she was contradicted. You are defying me. His voice came out low, dangerous. I am exercising my right to read what I sign. You know what your problem is? Darius stood up abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. You never knew your place. You always thought you had the right to an opinion, to decide, to have a voice. But the truth is, you were always just that, Eliza's husband. And now that she's dead, you are nothing. Every word was a precise slap. Nothing, he repeated, savoring the cruelty. You think you built something? That you helped with anything? You were the luxury housekeeper, Dad, the one who cooked, cleaned, and stayed quiet while the real men brought in the money. I remained still. Not even Carol, who had come down when she heard the argument, dared to interfere. So I'm going to tell you in a way even you understand. Darius leaned close to my face. Either you sign those papers, or I sue you for obstruction of probate proceedings. And believe me, I have very, very good lawyers. Lawyers who will prove you don't have the mental capacity to manage assets. They will have you forcibly institutionalized if necessary. He leaned in even closer. You'll end your days drooling in a third-rate retirement home, taking controlled medication and watching soap operas. Is that what you want? The silence that followed was sharp as broken glass. Then for the first time in 67 years, I smiled at a threat. I smiled because I knew what he didn't. I smiled because there were only 3 days left. I smiled because every word of that speech was being recorded by the device Lewis had discreetly installed in the living room lamp. You know what, Darius? My voice came out calm, almost gentle. You are absolutely right. I never knew my place. Because my place was never beneath anyone's feet. I took the papers and slowly tore them up, one by one. Now get out of my house and only come back when you learn that respect isn't inherited. It's earned. Darius left my house that Saturday, with a hatred so palpable I could taste the bitterness of it in the air. This time, he didn't slam the door. He just left in silence. And that silence was much more terrifying than any scream. Tiffany was waiting for him in the car, looking at her phone. I watched through the window as he got in, slammed the steering wheel twice, and drove off at speed, the tires squealing on the asphalt. She turned to look at my house, and even from a distance, I could see the smile. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who was planning something. They'll be back. Carol was beside me, watching the car disappear around the corner. And they'll come back with everything. I know. 3 days remaining, Tom. 3 days until the claw's deadline. Can you hold on? I looked at this woman I had barely known 2 weeks ago, who was now my only real ally in this silent war. Carol had turned but on a light in a corridor I thought ended in complete darkness. I'll hold on. My voice came out firmer than I felt. Because I don't have a choice. But in reality, for the first time in a long time, I did have a choice. And I was choosing not to bow. That same night, Attorney Lewis showed up discreetly at the back door. He carried a laptop and a serious expression that made his face look like the scene of a family crime. Mr. Peterson, I need you to see this. He opened the computer on the kitchen table, adjusted his glasses, and pressed play. The screen showed my living room, a discreet angle captured by the hidden camera in the lamp. And there was Darius in high definition, saying every poisonous word he had spewed hours earlier. You were the luxury housekeeper, Dad, the one who cooked, cleaned, and stayed quiet, while the real men brought in the money. Hearing it a second time didn't hurt less, but this time there was a layer of distance, as if I were watching someone else's story, a man who had been humiliated for too long. I also have recordings of the will reading, the meeting with the appraisers, Tiffany's visit with the assisted living brochures. Lewis ran his fingers over the trackpad, showing folder after folder of audio and video files. 27 days of documentation. 27 days of your son proving exactly the kind of character your wife feared he had. Eliza knew it. She knew it. Lewis carefully closed the laptop, like someone closing a casket. The financial deviations were the final straw. But Eliza had been observing her son's behavior for years. The arrogance, the contempt, the lack of empathy. She told me something I will never forget. Counselor, I raised a monster, and now I need to ensure that monster doesn't destroy the only person who was always by my side. The tears came unbidden. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of validation, of finally being seen by someone who mattered. Carol hugged my shoulder, holding tight. 3 days remaining. Attorney Lewis put the laptop in his bag. On Monday, 30 full days will have passed since Eliza's death. I have called a new meeting in the office for a supplementary reading of the will. Darius doesn't know what it's about, but he will attend. I sent the official summons through the civil registry. He has no choice. And if he suspects? The attorney allowed himself a discreet smile. He thinks this meeting is for you to finally sign the waivers of inheritance. I implied it in the summons. He's going to arrive confident, victorious, and he's going to leave destroyed. Carol finished, without a hint of pity in her voice. On Sunday, the day before the final meeting, the house was strangely silent. Neither Darius nor Tiffany made contact. No call, no surprise visit, nothing. It was the calm before the storm, and I could feel the electricity in the air. I spent the day organizing the house, not because it needed it. The house was impeccable, but because I needed to do something with my hands to keep from going insane with anxiety. I was polishing Grandma Edith's hutch for the third time when I realized I wasn't just cleaning wood. I was saying goodbye, because regardless of what happened tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same. Either I would lose my son forever, or he would learn a lesson so harsh that he might never forgive me for applying it. The conference room was exactly as I remembered it. Varnished mahogany table, leather chairs, wide windows showing the city below, small, distant, oblivious to the drama about to unfold inside. Darius slumped into a chair with that Lord of the Universe posture, legs open, arms stretched across the back of the next chair. Tiffany sat next to him, crossed her legs, and started scrolling through her phone, as if this were just another boring meeting she attended out of obligation. Carol positioned herself strategically next to me. Attorney Lewis went to the door, closed it with a discreet click, that made Darius raise an eyebrow, but he said nothing. Then he returned to his chair, opened that same worn brown folder, and adjusted his glasses with meticulous movements. "Well," Darius patted his thighs impatiently, "let's get this over with. I brought new documents for Dad to sign. Simpler this time, no complicated legal jargon." He pushed a folder across the table toward me. "Actually, Mr. Peterson, we won't be needing those documents." Attorney Lewis didn't even look at the folder. "Today's meeting has a different purpose." Silence. Darius blinked, confused. Tiffany lowered her phone. "What do you mean, different purpose?" His voice had lost some of its arrogance. "We are here for the supplementary reading of your mother's will." Lewis opened the folder, pulling out the same envelope I had seen days ago. "There is a second page that was not read at the first meeting. For legal and contractual reasons, it could only be revealed after 30 full days had passed since her death." I saw the color drain from Darius's face. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to know something was wrong. "Second page? What is this about?" He leaned forward, trying to look merely curious. But I saw the tension in his shoulders because he wasn't supposed to know. Lewis responded with the professional calm of someone who had seen many storms. "Your mother recorded this additional clause 3 months before she passed, with express instructions that it only be revealed after a period of observation." "Observation of what?" Tiffany had also leaned forward, her acrylic nails nervously drumming on the table. "Of Mr. Darius Patterson's behavior toward his father." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Darius let out a short, uncomfortable laugh. "Behavior? What the hell does that mean?" "That's too subjective, isn't it?" "Not when there is documentation." Lewis turned on the laptop on the table. "According to the instructions left by your mother, I was appointed the executor of the will, with powers to observe and document your interactions with Mr. Peterson during the 30-day period." "You spied on me!" Darius's voice rose an octave. "I documented," Lewis corrected, pressing play. The first scene that appeared on the screen was from the will reading. Darius laughing, mocking the $15,000 left to me. The words resonated through the room again, now amplified by the speakers. 15,000? That won't even cover Tiffany's manicure appointments. Tiffany sank into her chair, pale. The video continued. The meeting with the appraisers. Darius cataloging my furniture as merchandise. Tiffany's visit with the assisted living brochures. And finally, the scene from Saturday. Darius calling me a luxury housekeeper, saying I was nothing. Threatening to have me forcibly institutionalized. Every word, every gesture, every expression of contempt, documented in high definition. When the video ended, Darius was white as paper. Tiffany had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide open. 27 days of documentation. Lewis closed the laptop. 27 days of behavior that characterizes, according to legal analysis I requested from 3 independent specialists, psychological abuse, coercion, attempted wrongful appropriation of assets, and threat of unlawful confinement. I was angry. People say things when they're angry. Darius was desperate now, his hands trembling. That can't count. I didn't know I was being recorded. Exactly. Carol stood up, approaching the table with the posture of the prosecutor she once was. You didn't know, so you revealed who you truly are when you think no one is watching. And that's what your mother wanted to find out. Not the son you pretended to be in front of her, but the man you had become when you thought there were no consequences. Darius turned to me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw real panic in his eyes. Dad, you're not going to let this happen, are you? I'm your son. I was just stressed about Mom's death. You know how it is. It wasn't personal. He was begging now, his voice cracking. Please,
You can't do this to me. I looked at that 40-year-old man, sweating cold, desperate, pleading, and I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger who had learned all the wrong lessons in life. You're right, Darius. I can't do this to you. My voice came out calm, serene. You did it to yourself. No. He hit the table. I'm going to sue. I'm going to annul this ridiculous will. I have rights. I'm an only child. You can try. Attorney Lewis gathered the documents with irritating tranquility. But you'll lose, and you'll spend the $15,000 you'll have left on attorney fees. Your decision. Tiffany got up, grabbing her bag. Darius, let's go. We'll fix it with other lawyers, real lawyers. She shot a poisonous look at Attorney Lewis. But Darius didn't move. He was looking at me with an expression that oscillated between hatred and disbelief, as if he couldn't process that the invisible man he had trampled his whole life had just flipped the script. How many years, Dad? His voice came out broken. How many years did you spend waiting for this? Planning to destroy me? I didn't plan anything, Darius. Your mother planned. I just let you show who you truly are. I got up, grabbed my briefcase, and if it serves as any consolation, I hope that $15,000 teaches you more about dignity than $30 million ever would have. I walked toward the door. Carol unlocked it, opened it for me. Before leaving, I turned one last time. Darius was still sitting, head in his hands. Tiffany was on the phone, probably already calling lawyers, calculating if there was still any way to save the money. And I felt nothing. No joy from the victory. No sadness from the loss. Just a strange emptiness, where a father's love should have been. Maybe that was what it meant to finally be free. The 3 months following that morning in Attorney Lewis's office were an emotional roller coaster I wasn't prepared for. Darius tried to challenge the will, as he promised. He hired a lawyer who promised him miracles in exchange for his last savings. But Lewis was right. They had no case. The clause was solid, the documentation irrefutable, and 3 independent experts confirmed that the recorded behavior characterized psychological abuse. The judge, a gray-haired woman with the tired eyes of someone who had seen too much family ingratitude, denied the appeal at first instance. Darius appealed. He lost again. It cost him exactly $14,700 in attorney fees. He was left with $300 from what his mother had left him. Tiffany abandoned him the second week after the court decision. There was no goodbye letter, no drama. She simply packed her bags while he was at the lawyer's office. She took the jewelry he had given her, the car registered in her name, and disappeared. She left a note stuck to the refrigerator with 3 words. It was fun. I heard about this through Ms. Carroll, who learned about it from the gossip in the building where Darius lived, who happened to be a cousin of one of her former clients. Female information networks are more efficient than any intelligence service. I felt neither pity nor joy, only a cold realization. He had chosen a woman who loved him for what he had, not for who he was. And when the having ended, the being wasn't enough. As for me, for the first time in 67 years, I needed to find out who I was when I wasn't being defined by someone else. I was no longer Eliza's husband, no longer Darius's father. I was just Thomas, and Thomas needed to reinvent himself. The first thing I did was renovate the house, not because it needed it, the structure was solid, but because I needed it. I hired a young designer, a girl with big glasses and electric blue hair, who listened to me for 3 hours before drawing a single line. You want to transform memories into new beginnings, she had said, looking at the rooms with eyes that saw possibilities. Let's do it. We painted the walls, No more beige and white, the colors Eliza preferred because they were neutral and increased property value. I chose cobalt blue for the living room, a deep blue that reminded me of the ocean I had never seen up close. Gold for the accents, frames, doorknobs, baseboards. The designer suggested they made all the difference. The kitchen received Portuguese tiles in shades of yellow and orange, colors that seemed to hold sun inside the house, even on cloudy days. Grandma Edith's hutch stayed in the same place, but now restored, revarnished, shining with renewed dignity. My mother's chandelier was cleaned piece by piece, every crystal pendant polished, until it reflected light like small stars. And where our wedding portrait used to hang, Eliza and me, young and full of dreams, I put a photograph of myself at 25 before the marriage, when I still dreamed of being an architect. That young man in the portrait had bright eyes. I had forgotten I was once like that. At 67, I enrolled in the open enrollment program at the local community college. Not to complete the architecture degree. That dream was behind me, and that was fine. But I took a course on art history, another on urban gardening, and a third on civil rights that Carol insisted I take. You never know when you'll need it, she had said with that knowing smile. I made real friends, not the superficial friendships of an entrepreneur's husband, where you smiled at dinners and never revealed anything true, but friendships with people who recognize each other in pain and recovery. Men like me who had spent decades being invisible and were learning to take up space. Enrique, 71, widowed by a doctor who openly cheated on him and left half the inheritance to her lover. Robert, 65, divorced after discovering his wife had a second family in another city. James, 69, who never married because he cared for his sick father until he died. And when he was finally free, he was too old to start. We met every Tuesday afternoon in my cobalt blue living room. We drank tea from cups I had bought especially for this, fine porcelain with gold details, and we told our stories. We laughed, we cried. We reconstructed our narratives in a way that made sense to us, not the women who defined us. I planted a garden in the backyard. Roses, jasmine, lavender. Flowers Eliza never allowed because they attract bees and require work. Now, the bees came, and the work was mine, and there was something deeply satisfying about getting my hands dirty and watching something beautiful grow because of my care. 6 months after the meeting, in Attorney Lewis's office, Darius appeared. He didn't announce he was coming. He just rang the doorbell one Saturday morning, and when I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight. His beard was unshaven. His clothes were simple. A faded t-shirt, worn jeans, nothing like the Italian suits and leather shoes. "Hi, Dad." His voice came out husky, as if he hadn't used it much lately. "Darius?" I didn't invite him in. Not yet. We stood there in the doorway, an awkward silence stretching between us like old gum. He swallowed hard. "I needed to talk to you." "Then talk." He looked around the empty street, at his feet, anywhere but at me. "I got a job at an accounting firm. Administrative assistant. Minimum wage and a half." A pause. "It's humiliating. I, who was a company director, now file papers and make coffee for people who earn less than I used to spend on lunch." I waited. I wasn't going to make it easy for him. "It's honest." He took a deep breath. "And at the end of the day, when I lie down in the tiny apartment I share with 2 other guys, at least I sleep without feeling like I stole from someone." Something moved in my chest. Small, cautious. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe it was the beginning of something similar. "Why did you come here, Darius?" He finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Genuine shame. Because I spent 6 months blaming you, blaming Mom, blaming the world. And this morning, I woke up and realized the only one to blame was me. His hands trembled. I was a horrible son, not just ungrateful. I was cruel, and you didn't deserve any of it. Tears began to roll down his face. They weren't manipulative tears. I knew those. These were the tears of someone who finally saw the monster in the mirror. I didn't come to apologize because I know I don't deserve it. And I didn't come to ask for money because I learned that money I didn't earn is worthless. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I came to say that I understood. I understood the lesson. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the son you deserve to have. I remained silent for a time that seemed eternal. Then I stepped aside. Come in. I'll make coffee. It wasn't complete forgiveness, not immediate reconciliation, but it was a door opening slowly, cautiously. Because in the end, I discovered that justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. And sometimes, restoration means giving someone the opportunity to rebuild who they are, even if it hurts, even if it's scary, even if you never go back to being father and son as you were before, because that before was broken from the start. 2 years have passed since that morning Darius appeared at my door. 2 years that taught me that rebuilding bridges is slow, delicate work that requires patience from both sides. Darius didn't become the perfect son of fairy tales. He didn't move back in with me. He doesn't call every day. He doesn't pretend that years of cruelty can be erased with a few apologies. But he shows up once a week, sometimes twice, always bringing something simple. Bread from the bakery I like, flowers from the market, or simply his presence. And we talk for real now. Not those superficial conversations of, how are you, followed by fine, but real conversations where he tells me about work. He was promoted to financial analyst. He earns enough now to have his own apartment. Small, but his own. And I tell him about my classes, my gardening projects, the friends who have become my new family. Once, he looked at the cobalt blue living room wall and said, "It looks nice. I never imagined you liked such vibrant colors." "I didn't know it either," I replied, pouring the coffee. "I spent 42 years not knowing who I was, beyond husband and father. I'm discovering it little by little." He was silent for a moment, stirring the sugar in his coffee with slow movements. "I'm sorry I stole that from you." His voice came out small. "You didn't steal it, Darius. I gave it away. That's the difference." I sat in the armchair across from him, the one that's now my favorite, emerald green velvet bought at a vintage furniture store. I learned that no one can make us invisible without our permission. I chose to disappear because I thought that's what a good husband, a good father did. I was wrong. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. On my 70th birthday, Darius had just turned 42. He showed up with a carefully wrapped gift. When I opened it, I found a rosewood picture frame, clearly handmade, with simple but careful carvings. "I made it in a carpentry class," he explained, blushing slightly. I thought, well, you always valued things that carry history, so I wanted to start creating new, good stories. Inside the frame was a photo of us taken 3 weeks earlier in the garden. Me watering the lavender, him in the background helping to prune the roses. Both of us smiling. Not posed smiles, real smiles. The kind that happen when you are simply living a good moment. "Thank you, son." And this time, the word son didn't hurt. Carol remained my anchor. We had dinner together at least twice a week, alternating between my house and hers. She had started dating a 75-year-old widower. She met on a Caribbean cruise we went on together, something I never would have done alone, but that Carol insisted we needed to experience. Tom, we spent our whole lives taking care of everyone else. It's time to take care of ourselves. She was right. The cruise was liberating. Seeing the ocean for the first time at 69 made me understand how many things I had missed out on while I was busy being useful to others. The Tuesday friends, Enrique, Robert, and James, became confidants, brothers I chose. Enrique had opened a small carpentry shop with the inheritance he won in court. Robert had returned to painting, something he abandoned at 20 when his wife said art didn't pay the bills. James had adopted 3 cats and was finally taking the trip to Europe he had always dreamed of. We were all blossoming at an age when society says we should be fading. Attorney Lewis also became a friend. I discovered he was a widower. He had lost his wife to the same cancer that took Eliza. We understood each other silently, as people who have survived profound losses can understand one another. One afternoon over coffee, he told me that Eliza had cried the day she discovered Darius's deviations. She blamed herself. She said she had raised a son who valued money more than character because she herself had spent her life chasing money. The clause in the will wasn't revenge, Mr. Peterson. It was a mother's last attempt to save her son, to shake him hard enough to wake him up. It worked, I said, thinking of the Darius of today, different from the arrogant man who had shoved me at the funeral. It hurt, but it worked. I'm really glad you're here, and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen, so you can choose what to watch next.